The Grand Music Hall was filled with excitement and anticipation. Outside, the luxurious limousines lined up in front of the theater, while elegantly dressed guests in tailored suits and extravagant gowns slowly made their way inside. This was the prestigious annual music gala, an event where the most talented young musicians from across the country gathered, along with famous critics, the wealthiest sponsors, and influential music figures. It was a night to celebrate the art of music, a night reserved for the elite. In the backstage area, the buzz was palpable. Artists were practicing their pieces one last time, adjusting their costumes, nervously preparing for their performance. Some were engaged in quiet conversations, sizing up their competition with a mixture of arrogance and admiration. But amidst all the bright young faces, one stood out among the rest. Nathan Whitmore, the only son of billionaire tech mogul Richard Whitmore, was the center of attention. At just 17 years old, Nathan had already made a name for himself in the world of classical music. His flawless technique and exceptional talent had earned him 5 state-level awards, and he had even performed at Carnegie Hall in New York. But it was not just his talent that made him stand out. It was his air of superiority, his cold, aloof demeanor, and the subtle arrogance with which he carried himself. Nathan was fully aware of the attention he received. He thrived on it. With his sharp blue eyes and chiseled features, he exuded an almost regal aura. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, and his golden hair shimmered under the bright backstage lights. He was an artist destined for greatness, or so he believed. As he stood off to the side, eyes casually surveying the room, he allowed himself a small, confident smile. It was his night after all. In the shadows of the backstage area, hidden behind the bustle of the young prodigies, was Benjamin Davis. Benjamin, an elderly black man in his 60s, had worked as a janitor at the Charleston Grand Theater for years. His uniform was faded, his face etched with the lines of age and experience. Most of the musicians paid him no mind. He was just another invisible worker, someone who cleaned up after them and ensured everything was in place. He pushed his cleaning cart slowly down the narrow hallway, his old hands resting on the handle. Benjamin had been working here for as long as anyone could remember, but he was just part of the background, never a part of the limelight. Tonight, however, would be different. Tonight, Benjamin would become the center of attention in a way no one could have ever predicted. The stage was set. A magnificent Steinway grand piano gleamed under the professional lighting, positioned in the center of the stage, its black surface shining like a mirror. It was an instrument reserved for only the most talented musicians, a symbol of excellence, fame, and status. Every artist dreamed of playing on that stage, making their mark in the music world, and tonight Nathan Whitmore was determined to make that mark. As he walked past the curtains, ready to take his place on stage, he noticed something unusual. In the shadows behind the piano, Benjamin stood, his hands gently brushing the polished surface of the instrument. It was a momentary touch, but one that seemed to stir something in the old janitor. His eyes lingered on the piano for a brief moment, as though recalling something long forgotten. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Nathan's voice cut through the silence, sharp and filled with disdain. He approached Benjamin, his eyes narrowing in irritation. "That piano is not for you to touch." Benjamin quickly pulled his hand back, startled by the young man's sudden outburst. "I'm sorry, sir," he mumbled, lowering his head in apology. "I was just checking to see if the piano was properly clean." Nathan's lips curled into a thin smile, one that lacked any warmth. "Your job is to clean the floors, not play with the instruments," he said coldly, his voice dripping with contempt. "Know your place, old man?" A few of the other young musicians, standing nearby, chuckled at Nathan's words, clearly amused by the situation. They exchanged glances and whispered among themselves, all too happy to see the old janitor put in his place. Benjamin felt his heart sink. He had been on the receiving end of insults like this before, but it never got easier. Still, he didn't respond. He simply nodded quietly and moved away, pushing his cart back into the shadows of the backstage area. Nathan, meanwhile, stood there, satisfied with his sharp retort. He glanced at the piano one last time, a smug expression on his face. This was my night, he thought. Nothing could ruin it. As Benjamin walked back into the darkness of the backstage, something stirred within him. He had spent years cleaning these halls, watching countless performances, but tonight felt different. The young man's words had cut deeper than he expected. As Benjamin pushed his cart away, the weight of the past 20 years seemed to hang heavy on his shoulders. He had long since given up his own music career, bearing it deep within himself after the tragic loss of his daughter, Emily. Music had once been his life, but now it only served as a painful reminder of what he had lost. But tonight, something unexpected would happen. A single touch of the piano's keys would change everything. The backstage atmosphere shifted as Benjamin Davis, the elderly janitor, moved closer to the stage. His presence, though usually unnoticed, now captured the attention of those nearby. He pushed his cart slowly, the sound of the wheels on the floor blending into the distant hum of musicians rehearsing. But today, the cart seemed to echo louder, carrying with it an inexplicable weight. Benjamin paused near the Steinway piano, his hands resting on the cart handle. For a moment, he simply stared at the instrument, its gleaming black surface reflecting the lights, as if waiting for someone worthy to touch it. His old weathered fingers twitched involuntarily as they reached out, grazing the piano's polished surface. The touch was brief, but it seemed to stir something deep within him. Behind the stage, Nathan Whitmore, still confident and eager, noticed Benjamin's actions. He smirked, his eyes narrowing in disdain. What was this old man doing, touching the piano he believed was reserved for the greats? "What do you think you're doing?" Nathan's voice broke the silence, sharp and cutting. He approached, his posture rigid with superiority. "You've no right to even be near it." Benjamin recoiled, his hand retreating immediately, a subtle tremor in his fingers. He lowered his head, muttering an apology. I was just checking to see if the piano was polished properly." Nathan's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was nothing warm about it. "Your job is to clean, not play with the instruments. Know your place, Mr. Davis." A few of the nearby musicians laughed softly, their voices dripping with the same disdain. Their mocking glances made Benjamin feel smaller than he already did, but he remained silent, his gaze dropping to the floor as he pushed his cart further into the shadows. He had grown accustomed to such treatment, but today it stung in a way that it hadn't before. As Benjamin disappeared into the backstage area, the tension in the room faded for a moment, but it wasn't long before it returned with a new intensity. Everyone was waiting for Nathan's performance. The air was thick with expectation, and yet, as he prepared to take the stage, something strange happened. Benjamin, the janitor, appeared again, this time to everyone's shock, walking directly toward the Steinway grand piano. The murmurs in the room grew louder as Benjamin sat down slowly on the piano bench. His frail body seemed out of place against the gleaming piano. But there was something in his movements, something graceful and deliberate that commanded attention. The audience, already familiar with the typical procession of artists, fell into an unexpected silence. Benjamin placed his hands on the keys, his fingers trembling slightly as he let the weight of his hands settle on them. For a moment, nothing happened. But then he struck the first note, a simple sound, yet pure and clear, resonating in the stillness. It filled the hall, powerful and clean, like a bell ringing in the distance. The music that followed was not the technical brilliance one might expect from a world-class pianist, but it was rich with emotion. Each note seemed to tell a story, one that transcended the boundaries of perfection. Benjamin played with an intensity that was both quiet and overwhelming, the melody flowing effortlessly from his hands. The room fell into a deeper silence, each person absorbing the beauty of the music, unable to look away. Nathan, who had been so certain of his superiority just moments ago, stood frozen. He had never heard music like this before. Music that wasn't about precision, but about feeling. There was no showmanship, no desire to impress. It was simply an expression of the soul, a deeply moving creation that seemed to come from the very core of Benjamin's being. As the last note hung in the air, the silence that followed was profound. The young musicians, the critics, and the audience all sat in stunned awe. No one had expected this, least of all Nathan. He had mocked Benjamin, believing him to be nothing more than a janitor, but now he saw the truth. The janitor had played with more heart and soul than any of the so-called prodigies backstage. Benjamin's performance wasn't perfect in the way Nathan had been trained to appreciate, but it was undeniable in its beauty. He had touched something within every listener, something that Nathan had long neglected in his pursuit of technical perfection. The arrogance that Nathan had carried with him now seemed small, almost childish in the face of Benjamin's quiet grace. As the music faded into silence, Nathan felt something stir within him, humility, or perhaps just the beginning of it. He realized that the man he had belittled was not just an old janitor. He was someone who had something far more valuable than status or recognition. He had the ability to speak through music in a way Nathan had never understood before. The hall remained silent, almost as if time itself had stopped. Nathan Whitmore, still standing by the side of the stage, was struggling to process what had just happened. The crowd, previously focused on his impending performance, was now wrapped in the quiet aftermath of Benjamin's unexpected and moving performance. The tension in the air had shifted, and with it, Nathan's once unshakable confidence began to falter. Benjamin remained seated at the piano, his hands gently resting on the keys. He didn't need applause or recognition. He had played not to impress, but to express. He had shared something far more profound than the music industry's definition of success. A glimpse into his heart, into his years of pain, loss, and unspoken memories. Nathan's mind raced as he took in the scene before him. He had just witnessed something that completely defied his understanding of music. This old man who he had so casually dismissed had done something none of the polished prodigies backstage could accomplish. He had moved the audience not with technical mastery, but with raw emotion. Benjamin's music, though far from perfect in the way Nathan had been trained to value, had done what all great art should do. It had connected with the soul. Nathan stood there, his thoughts a whirlwind. He had spent his life honing his craft, perfecting every note, every finger placement, and yet, in a few minutes, this elderly janitor had undone everything he thought he knew about music. Nathan had always been proud of his technical skill, believing it was the key to success, but now he wasn't so sure. As the final echoes of Benjamin's music faded into the vast hall, the room remained still, as though it was holding its breath. The audience had been entranced, absorbed by the music that had been so unlike anything they had ever heard before. Some wiped away tears. Some simply sat motionless, contemplating what they had just experienced. And then, as the silence grew heavier, a voice broke through. It was a woman's voice, strong, authoritative, but filled with respect. She stepped forward from the back of the room, her posture straight and dignified, her eyes locked onto Benjamin with a sense of reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying throughout the hall, "I must ask for your attention. What you have just witnessed is not only a performance of extraordinary beauty, but the return of a legend. A man many of you may have forgotten, but who, for those who truly understand music, is unforgettable." The murmurs in the audience grew louder as everyone turned their attention to the woman. Who was she? What did she mean by legend? The woman, noticing the growing confusion, continued, "This man before you is Benjamin Davis Ellison, former principal pianist of the New York Symphony Orchestra. His name may have faded from public memory, but tonight he has reminded us all of what true music is, and what true artistry is." Gasps rippled through the audience as recognition dawned on the older music critics and some of the guests. Benjamin Davis Ellison, one of the most celebrated pianists of his time, had been right there before them, playing with more emotion than any of them could have anticipated. Nathan, still stunned, stood motionless, the realization crashing over him like a wave. The man he had mocked, the man he had belittled, was a living legend, a man who had once played for the world's greatest stages. Benjamin's hands, once shaking from age, were steady now as he slowly withdrew them from the keys. He didn't seek the applause or admiration that others might have craved. His life, his music, had never been about fame. It had always been about the heart, about the memories, the love, the pain he had endured over the years. And now the truth of who he was had been revealed. But it wasn't just about Benjamin's past. It was about the lesson he had taught everyone present. He had shown them that music was not about perfection. It wasn't about the glitz and glamour, or about who could play the most flawless notes. Music, at its core, was about the emotion that it carried, the story it told. And that was a story that Benjamin, despite the years of pain and loss, had still been able to tell with grace. As the whispers continued among the audience, Nathan felt a deep, almost unbearable sense of shame. He had spent his life being obsessed with perfection, seeking to outshine others, to claim the title of the best. But in that moment, he realized how little he had truly understood about the power of music. It wasn't about being flawless, it was about feeling. It was about giving something of yourself to the world and letting that emotion resonate with others. For the first time, Nathan understood that there was something far more important than being a prodigy or a star. There was humility, there was heart, there was the ability to connect with others in a way that transcended technique. Benjamin had done that, and he had done it in the most beautiful way possible. Nathan took a deep breath, his mind still reeling, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his arrogance. He had looked down on Benjamin, thinking that the janitor was nothing more than a shadow in the grand theater of music. But Benjamin had just shown him that shadows often have more substance than the brightest lights. The silence in the hall was almost unbearable, but in the midst of it, Nathan stood transfixed. The revelation of Benjamin's identity, the legend he had unknowingly mocked, left him reeling. His heart, once full of pride, now felt heavy with the weight of his arrogance. He could hear the soft whispers from the audience around him, the looks of disbelief, the admiration that had turned towards Benjamin. And yet, despite the shock of it all, something more powerful was beginning to shift within him. Nathan had always been driven by a desire to be the best, to prove his worth to the world. He had worked tirelessly to achieve perfection, to perform flawlessly, believing that success was measured by how well one could execute every note, every phrase, every nuance of a piece. But what Benjamin had shown him in just a few minutes was that true artistry was not about perfection. It was about vulnerability, about honesty, about allowing your heart to guide your hands. And for the first time, Nathan felt the sting of his own pride. He had once thought himself untouchable, the rising star of classical music, destined for greatness. But now, as he stood backstage watching Benjamin slowly rise from the piano bench, he felt small, as though everything he had worked for, every accolade, every award, was meaningless compared to what Benjamin had shared with the audience. Nathan looked down at his hands, his fingers twitching slightly as though they too were trying to understand what had just transpired. What had I missed all these years, he wondered. He had spent so long chasing after accolades, trying to perfect the mechanics of music, that he had forgotten what it meant to truly feel it, to let it speak for itself. Benjamin's performance had been flawless in its imperfection. It wasn't about technical skill, it was about the emotion behind the notes. It was about the music itself, speaking to the audience in a language beyond words, and that was something Nathan had never truly understood until now. As Benjamin began to walk off the stage, his movements slow and deliberate, the audience remained silent, still processing what they had just witnessed. No one seemed to know what to say or how to react. They had all been so sure that tonight belonged to Nathan, the young prodigy, but now they had witnessed something far more profound, a moment of true artistry that had transcended everything they had expected. Nathan remained standing in the shadows, unsure of what to do. He had been about to take the stage himself, but now standing there, he felt a profound unease. The stage, which had once seemed like his domain, now felt foreign to him. How could he perform now, knowing that the man who had just played the piano had taught him more about music in a few minutes than he had learned in his entire life? The backstage area was still buzzing with quiet conversations, but all Nathan could hear was the soft sound of his own breathing, the weight of Benjamin's performance pressing down on him. As the murmurs from the crowd grew louder, Nathan's thoughts began to clear, and a new understanding began to take root in him. He wasn't ready to perform. Not yet. Not until he understood what Benjamin had shown him. At that moment, a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was the woman from earlier, the one who had revealed Benjamin's identity to the crowd. She had been standing near the stage watching the scene unfold. Now she was making her way towards Nathan, her expression soft but serious. "Nathan," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I know you've been the center of attention tonight, but I think you've just witnessed something that will change your life." Nathan looked up, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were filled with understanding, as though she knew exactly what he was feeling. She wasn't looking at him with pity or judgment. She was simply observing him, waiting for him to understand. "You've spent your life perfecting your technique," she continued, "but sometimes the music isn't about perfection. It's about what you give to it, what you put into it." Nathan's mouth went dry as the words sank in. He had always believed that perfection was the key to success, that music was something to be mastered, controlled, and polished. But now he was beginning to see that there was more to it than that. Music was not just about the notes. It was about the emotions behind those notes, the stories they told. "I think you've already learned more than you realize," the woman said, her voice quiet but full of conviction. "But it's up to you to decide what you do with it. You can keep chasing perfection, or you can let go of your pride and let the music guide you. You might just find something more valuable than any award or recognition you've ever received." The woman's words hung in the air, and Nathan felt a lump form in his throat. He had always thought of himself as the best, but now, standing here, he realized that being the best was never what truly mattered. What mattered was how he approached the music, how he allowed it to shape him, to move him, to change him. For the first time in his life, Nathan wasn't thinking about what he could do to impress the audience, to earn their applause. Instead, he was thinking about how to make the music true, how to let it flow from his heart, unencumbered by the need for perfection. He could feel the weight of his past arrogance beginning to lift, slowly but surely, replaced by a sense of humility he had never known before. Benjamin's music had done what no critic, no teacher, no award could do. It had shown him the true meaning of artistry. Nathan turned toward the stage, his heart still racing, but now with a new sense of purpose. Tonight he would play, not for perfection, not for the applause, but for something deeper. He would play to connect, to feel, and to truly understand the music. It was time for him to let go of his pride and embrace the music for what it was meant to be. The night had changed, and so had Nathan Whitmore. The young prodigy who had once stood on the precipice of fame, eager to prove himself to the world, now found himself standing in the shadow of a deeper truth. The realization had come slowly, like the slow, steady build of a melody, but now it resonated through him with undeniable clarity. Benjamin Davis Ellison's music had shattered the walls of pride and arrogance Nathan had built around himself. The old janitor had given him more than just a performance. He had given him a lesson that would echo in his heart forever. The music wasn't about perfection. It was about emotion, about the truth in every note. It was about giving a piece of yourself to the world and letting the music speak for you. The hall was still. The buzz of conversation had quieted, and the audience, still processing what they had witnessed, now waited with anticipation. Nathan's heart beat in his chest as he stepped forward, his mind focused. He had been given a chance tonight, a chance to redeem himself not in the eyes of the audience, but in his own heart. The woman who had spoken to him earlier had been right. Nathan had already learned more than he realized. Now it was up to him to act on it. He wasn't going to try to impress anyone anymore. He was going to play for himself, for the music. As he walked toward the piano, his fingers trembling slightly, Nathan could feel the weight of his past ego lifting off his shoulders. He wasn't the best pianist in the world anymore, and that was okay. He was a human being, with flaws, with emotions, and he was about to play with all of that inside him. The music would guide him, not his desire for approval. Benjamin, still sitting quietly in the back of the hall, watched Nathan from a distance. The young man had come to a realization, just as he had hoped. He didn't need to say a word. He had already done his part. The music had spoken, and now Nathan was listening. As Nathan sat at the Steinway grand piano, his fingers rested lightly on the keys. The hall was so still that the faintest sound seemed to echo, filling the space. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the lessons he had learned that night, and then he began to play. The first note was simple, but there was a depth to it that had never been there before. He felt the sound resonate inside him, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to perfect it. The music flowed, rich and full of emotion, and with each passing note, Nathan began to feel something he had never truly felt in his performances before: peace. He played with passion, with the raw emotion that Benjamin had shown him. The melody he created was not flawless in the technical sense, but it was beautiful. It was a reflection of his soul, of everything he had been through, everything he had learned. The music spoke of humility, of loss, of growth. As he played, he could see the faces of the audience, their expressions softening as they felt the depth of the music. Some of them were moved to tears. The sound filled the hall, sweeping through the crowd like a wave. There were no more whispers of judgment, no more comparisons to others. There was just the music, and in that moment, it was enough. When the final note rang out, the silence that followed was profound. Nathan slowly withdrew his hands from the keys, his heart still racing, but now with a sense of fulfillment he had never known. He had played from his heart, not his ego, and it had been the most honest performance of his life. The applause was deafening, but Nathan didn't need it. He had already received the greatest gift he could ever ask for. He had rediscovered the true meaning of music. As he stood from the piano, he glanced toward the back of the hall. Benjamin was still there, sitting in the shadows, his hands folded in his lap, a slight smile on his lips. There was no need for words. Benjamin's presence was enough. Nathan walked off the stage, his head held high, but this time it was different. It wasn't the pride of a young man chasing fame. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had found himself, who had learned that true success wasn't about being the best, but about being true to oneself. The audience stood in ovation, but Nathan's eyes never left Benjamin's. In that moment, he knew that the greatest lesson of his life had come not from a prestigious music academy or a famous conductor, but from a humble janitor who had shown him the true value of music, of life, and of compassion. As the applause continued, Nathan made his way backstage, where the other musicians, who had once seen him as a rival, now watched him with a new respect. He smiled softly, his heart lighter than it had ever been. The night had transformed him, and he knew that from this moment forward, he would play not to be the best, but to share the music that came from his heart. And as for Benjamin, he quietly slipped away from the hall, unnoticed by most, as he had always done. But this time, his heart was content. He had done what he came to do, not for fame, not for recognition, but to teach a young man the greatest lesson of all. That music is not about perfection, it's about heart, it's about truth, it's about connection. And for that, Benjamin was at peace.